If he just made this video to say I disagree with Dylan's opinion on Taiwan, that'd be another thing. But instead, we're 4 minutes in, and all he's done is strawman my political career, say things about it which is incorrect, and then say that I have opinions that I don't. But the whole reason he's doing this is he wants to discredit me, right? He wants to discredit me in the eyes of his audience, because let's say that I was what he says I was. Well, yeah, having this type of a reaction to somebody like that would be justified. But that's not who I am. And so by him discrediting me in this way, he does not need to put in as much effort when actually engaging with my ideas. In fact, he doesn't need to engage with my ideas basically at all. Because if people in his audience have already thought Dylan is that piece of shit, imperialist swine who is doing nothing but trying to lobby for his big, cushy DC job, then yeah, I would discredit them. Anybody who believed that would discredit that human being. He hasn't watched my streams. He hasn't really interacted with my content. He just stumbled upon my tweet and then came to all these conclusions about me in his head that he is now projecting onto me without giving me a fair shake.
A curd is a curd.
Look, if you wanted to say I'm a lefty who believes too much in doing like that America can do good actually, but what you're doing right now is attacking a person who does not exist in this conversation. BadEmpanada is a YouTuber who recently has gotten into streaming. He usually does video essays. The thing is about his video essays, they're actually, many of them are very, very good, very, very well researched. But many people will mention that the BadEmpanada, or Mad Empanada, or as I will refer to him, Sad Empanada, that you see on YouTube is very different than the Sad Empanada you're going to see on Twitter. That Sad Empanada, I've had a few interactions with him before. Most notably, he said that I was a Nazi because I had an American flag in my background, which, I mean, that just, it feels like something you'd find in like an old like 2014 SJW compilation. It's also, of course, painting with broad brushes, but he has worked with broad brushes in the past and will continue to work with broad brushes in the future. Anyway, he has also interacted with me before because he has tried to do research on me, and he tries to make comments about my my very small career in politics, right? And he has consistently gotten the information about it wrong. He has gotten the offices, the candidates I were working for, incorrect multiple times, repeatedly. He has gotten basic information about who I was working for wrong. And I've called him out for this multiple occasions, but he just keeps doing it. For whatever reason, he can seem to do like a ton of research on his video essays and everything else, but he can't do, if he's going to bring up my history, he should like tell the truth about my history. For example, something that he says on many occasions is that I was a foreign policy advisor for somebody running for a local office. No, what he's talking about, as he said on Twitter multiple times, is a state senator, right? So he thinks that I advise somebody running for state senate. That's not true. I advise somebody who was a state senator who then ran for Congress, which he tries to downplay the race. But just to be clear, the person who held the seat before Jill Carter ran for it was Elijah Cummings. Now, if that name means nothing to you, I'll just say he was a late, great civil rights hero. And then he will always bring up the fact of like, hey, they got third place though. Yes, out of 33 people running. And we were close to second, but I think we missed it by about 2%. Could have been better, but you know what? Campaigns that are basically guaranteed to win are not going to be getting upstarts like me anyway. So he's consistently gotten it wrong. I don't know why he doesn't put the effort in to do basic research about me if he's going to talk about me in that manner, why he has to paint with such broad brushes, why he has to act in such unbelievable bad faith constantly. But whatever. I wish he just stuck to the video essays because they're quite good. They are quite good. But he has recently started a Twitch channel, and he's, been like firing at every Twitch streamer that he can. And so, you know what? I'm here. He shot at me, so let's listen at it.
Who don't know, Dylan Burns is like some like 20, 21-year-old, something like that, American Twitch streamer
You know, it's good when the first thing they mention is my age. That was gonna be great.
who claims to be like a foreign policy expert specialist, right? Like,
I have never claimed that. As everybody on my channel knows, I've said a million times, I do not consider myself a foreign policy expert. I've never claimed to be a foreign policy expert. And I specifically, when asked if I'm a foreign policy expert, will say, I'm not a foreign policy expert. I've said this on YouTube videos. I've said this during streams. I've even said this on Twitter. I'm forgetting if I ever posted a message in my Discord about it. But I've been very public about the fact I don't consider myself an expert. Do I think I know more than the average person? Yes. Do I have some experience around foreign policy? Yes. And that's why, instead of calling myself an expert, I think it's more appropriate to list the type of jobs I've worked around when it comes to foreign policy, and the bit of experience I have and the bit of studying I've done, and as I continue to grow my knowledge about foreign policy. I tell people regularly to go to other sources, not just to listen to me. I do not consider myself an expert. At first, when people say this, like I've been like, okay, whatever. But people have been saying this so consistently about me, when I've been so consistent and persistent about not wanting to be considered a foreign policy expert, that it's starting to get a little annoying. But no, I'm not a foreign policy expert. Don't consider me such. And if people are asking, and people will call me a foreign policy expert, the reason I don't consider myself one is I do not think I have the amount of experience necessary to say I'm an expert in this. Because I know people who've been doing this much longer than me who still have yet to say that. I think maybe some people just feel that way because I'm one of the few people they listen to on foreign policy, but I just want you to know I'm just the dude who's really nerded out about foreign policy right now, has worked a little bit around it, and is trying to hopefully develop their knowledge more so moving forward. Not an expert.
Like, he has all of the correct ideas about how the US should do its imperialism and why, all of which just so happen to align perfectly with the US foreign policy establishment, though his justifications are a bit more modern for the young 20-ish-year-old progressive crowd.
All of my foreign policy positions seem to align with the US establishment. That is a bold claim. Definitely when I assume it's going to be supported by a single tweet thread about Taiwan. But I want to normalize relations with Cuba. I want Biden to immediately end the Saudi blockade of Yemen, because what I see in Yemen is nothing but a humanitarian disaster perpetuated by our support for that conflict. I was against the Soleimani strike. I was for withdrawing from Afghanistan. I opposed Donald Trump's radical proposals when it came to Venezuela, even though I don't even know much about South American politics. I don't need to know much to know I don't want to get involved in no war with Venezuela. I opposed Israel's normalization with Morocco based upon the undermining of the indigenous people of the Western Sahara. Definitely when they have been designated to need a vote to determine their self-determination by the United Nations. I want to join the International Criminal Court, which would be pretty directly contradictory with the Hague Invasion Act. Vietnam, I opposed that. I called what happened in Bolivia to Morales' government a coup. I mean, everybody knows my views on Turkey. Now, you can call those views many different things. They're varied, right? And I don't every single time stick my head out and say, America the devil, right? I'm not in every situation just saying America the devil, because that would lack nuance. But to say that I just perpetuate, like I'm just basically a spokesperson of the establishment, when most of the time I would say I'm actually pushing against it, I don't know. Hell, and the thing is, I don't even need to prove that most of the time I'm pushing against it. I could just use one or two examples, that would be enough. I could just say sometimes I do, but I push against it, I think, pretty solidly, but whatever.
Like, we need to do all the same imperialism as before for women's rights. We need to do
I don't know what he's talking about. I assume he thinks that because I said that women are going to have a tough shake in Afghanistan due to the Taliban, and that women's rights did progress in the last 20 years, that was a justification for us to stay. Even though I've publicly stated on multiple times and even debated people like Xander Hall, which this guy made a video about Xander Hall's Afghanistan video. Instead of me just reviewing it, I talked to Xander Hall about it directly. By the end of the conversation, both of us agreed that we should withdraw from Afghanistan. So, just because I acknowledge that women's rights are important and they're important internationally, does not mean that I want to go invade countries in the name of feminism.
Defend democracy from the evil yellow peril Chinese threat, all that sort of thing. So
I don't, okay, so people can have criticisms of China and it not be yellow peril. That's just framing. In fact, I could easily say, hey, Empanada, why did you make this anti-China yellow peril video about Xinjiang to advance American interests and narratives about the so-called genocide, quote unquote, right? I could start rolling out the tanky talking points and say that you're perpetuating yellow peril. You would need to prove how I'm participating in that, how I'm pushing like some blatantly false propaganda to demonize the Chinese government, right? You would need to prove that. You can't just like offhandedly make that claim with no evidence. Okay, though.
So he's really not that much different than...
You're gonna pause a lot in this video? Oh yeah. I mean, if he's making claims about me, then like, what am I supposed to do?
Than, you know, the generic sort of Kissinger sort of people. So
Wait.
it's not that much different. Evil yellow peril Chinese threat, all that sort of thing. So he's really not that much different than, you know, the generic sort of Kissinger sort of people, since they also use that second justification. But
I'm not that different than Kissinger. And the Kissinger types. I mean, on one hand, I never committed any war crimes or advocated for war crimes to be committed in like South America on a grand scale, slaughtering civilians. I didn't step aside and do nothing when the genocide in the Indo-Pacific was happening during his time in an administration. I can get into that deeper at another time. That would take me to do some more prep if I was to remember the specifics on how Henry Kissinger was given reports on how a genocide was occurring and literally did nothing. But that had to do, I think, specifically with Bangladesh. You would really need to justify comparing somebody to somebody like Henry Kissinger with a decent amount of evidence. You can't just like throw out that I'm like Kissinger. Not to mention he's building it off the false premise that I just defend the United States in all instances. I'm starting to think that Empanada might not be extremely good faith.
You could say that tanky talking points are called tank flagging.
Tries to make it sound like progressive in a way that he can sell it to like people who might be more inclined to be more critical of US interventionism. And he's someone who's very clearly pining to become like a Washington DC analyst.
I mean, like let's say he said, like if I stepped out and they said Empanada is gonna be like the next Caleb Maupin before becoming Stalin and like pushing everybody into gulags, like that is a weighty accusation that needs to be substantiated, right?
Pining to become like a Washington DC analyst or like advisor type. And I think we all know what that means, right? Like that means that he wants to be like a Kissinger type.
You have an interest in foreign policy?
A curd is a curd.
Kissinger. Okay. Number one, there's many different types of people who have worked in American foreign policy, right? You got your Kissingers on one side, and way on the other side, you got people like Matt Duss, okay? Who, for people who don't know, is the foreign policy advisor for Senate Budget Committee Chairman Bernie Sanders. To just paint everybody with that same brush and just like pulling it out. You're pulling Kissinger's name out like a skeleton key. Like, haha, you an American? You talk about foreign policy? Kissinger. Okay, wonderful. Again, not substantiated. If there's anybody I would look towards to not have a career like, it would be Kissinger. In fact, actually, when we're talking about this specific issue, Taiwan, Kissinger really historically downplayed the importance of Taiwan, right? And I think when it comes to democratic principles and the idea that he could stand with democracy, quote unquote, Kissinger was not somebody who really cared much about democracy or human rights in any fashion, right? And if I was a Kissingerian type, I would be 100% on board with us continuing our involvement in the war in Yemen. I would be 100% on board with staying in Afghanistan. Do you know the strategic benefits we could get? Didn't you see the concern trolling about the poor border of Tajikistan? I could 100% be like, no, we don't need to open up to Cuba. It means nothing to us. Hell, you know what? Let's intensify sanctions on Venezuela. It's our backyard. We need to make sure it keeps in line. Why would I have called what happened in Bolivia a coup? Not to mention my positions on Turkey. Or Morocco. I mean, that's just a basic example. That's something that I've been critical of Biden for not reversing the Trump-era policy. Again, you can't just say somebody wants to get involved in foreign policy, therefore, Kissinger. Like, that's a huge jump. It would be like me saying, oh, so you call yourself a democratic socialist. So why do you love Stalin? It's like, okay, there's something between here and there that needed to be filled with context and evidence.
Right? Like, there's no such thing as a foreign policy analyst in DC or like someone involved. Even worse than an analyst is someone who's involved in like the actual advisement of politicians, because those people are the worst. Their job is just.
And you know what is the best strategy moving forward? Just be like, okay, so let's do nothing. Let's not become foreign policy advisors. In fact, let's make sure that the foreign policy, quote unquote, blob, whatever you want to call it, stays like that. Let's not go in there at all. Let's not become advisors and advise politicians to do better things. So here's a great example. When I was working for Jill Carter, she wanted a foreign policy advisor because she doesn't have experience with foreign policy. Obviously, she didn't have a big budget. So she called me, which I think to call me the budget airlines of foreign policy advisors would be an understatement. And she had to go to a newspaper place. It was some sort of newspaper. But it was a Jewish newspaper, and one of the questions was going to be about BDS. And she didn't know anything about BDS. And I helped talk to her about why BDS is something that, even if you don't personally agree with it, must be protected because it's free speech. And if you don't know about Maryland politics, you should know something that is Larry Hogan has passed anti-BDS, anti-free speech laws in the state of Maryland. So taking that is a bold stance, but it is one that is not only the correct stance to take, but I also think it's like legalistically correct. Like, I think it's unconstitutional, BDS, like banning BDS in my opinion, or going after BDS in the way Larry Hogan has, for example, when it comes to like state contracts and such. That was, in my opinion, important. It was important for somebody running to Congress to understand the depth of that conversation, or at least have some vague understanding of it. And the interview went well because she learned and she grew as she ran for this office. And I think that's important. And I think just saying, well, let's just leave that up to the foreign policy blob so we can stand on the street and do next to nothing, that's not going to be very helpful. And most certainly, let me say, if you're like saying, okay, don't become foreign policy advisors, don't get involved in foreign policy, don't get involved in the State Department because these are evil institutions, right? They do evil things. My question in response to you is, what do you think Americans should do? Because if you don't want them to try to get into positions of power and try to use that power in either less harmful, which would be beneficial, or a good way, which I know you don't even think is possible, what should they do instead? What is the other option?
Essentially to find justifications for US imperialism. So that's basically where Dylan Burns comes from. He's already done some very minor work that he likes to play up as.
I don't play it up. If people ask about it, I say what it is. I don't say that I'm like the best this or the best that. People will ask me about my work, I'll bring it up. Or if I'm introducing myself to somebody, I'll talk about my experience.
It's like a foreign policy advisor for failed political candidates, which I don't even know what that entails. Like, why does someone who like came third in an election warrant even having a minor like local election?
It was not a minor local elections. The late great civil rights hero Elijah Cummings passed away, and his Congress seat needed to be replaced. And so they had a special election for the congressional seat, and she was one of the candidates. And there were over 30 candidates. So you can say third, but when you think of it was a field of over 30 people, that's actually pretty decent in my opinion. Definitely if it was somebody's first run for a federal office. And she needed it because of the interview that I just talked about and other reasons.
Warrant having a foreign policy advisor. That's kind of funny and ridiculous. But yeah, that's like him, basically. And he tries to sell people this, generic US foreign interventionist foreign policy on Twitch. And he's been quite successful at it, but I'm not sure if that's because it's actually swaying people or basically because, he's basically telling your generic American exceptionalists what they want to hear, right? Like a generic American patriot nationalist exceptionalist, which is 90% of the US population at the very least, wants to hear that US imperialism is good. They want
I don't even know what to say about this because he's built it all under the false premise that all I do is I start stream and say America the best, America the greatest, America does nothing wrong ever, and we're the best, and we need to invade Iraq because feminism. Where did he get this? He's just throwing it out there. He's just throwing these accusations out there with no evidence. So it's like, okay, I can't respond to this.
Krakowski cheered. X500. I mean, primaries in deep blue seats are some of the most important elections if you want leftist, or Dem Soc, or even Soc Dem policies to pass.
Yeah, and not to mention, it was a high-profile race because of who it was. It was Elijah Cummings. And you want to know who we came 2 points behind? Elijah Cummings' wife. We came 2 points behind the wife of the man who was a civil rights icon. I think that's okay. Is it the greatest in the world? No, we could have done much better. There were issues in the campaign, and I hope next time, hopefully if she runs for federal office again, we can fix those mistakes and do better next time.
Told that the things that they'd be doing anyway are good, but they also kind of want to be told, that they're good for reasons that might be a little bit different to the norm, right? You can't sell this stuff by just saying, oh, communism, bad. You also need to add in different things now. Like you need to, for example, say, that these people are authoritarians with women's rights. You need to try and link leaders who the US finds inconvenient to terrorism or organized crime or whatever, no matter how untenable it is. That's where Dylan Burns comes in.
Well, then show me an example of doing that. Because I've been extremely critical of the Bush administration's attempt to tie Iraq to 9/11. I've been very critical of that. What other example are you going to show me? Maybe you're going to talk about how I'm honest about the fact that the Turkish government, which by the way is in NATO, invaded northeastern Syria, with many of them being former ISIS fighters that invaded the Northeast. Is that the example you're going to use? There is none. You're just talking out of your ass. You're talking to somebody who is not in the room with you. You're talking to somebody who isn't even the topic of the video. You're talking about somebody that doesn't exist. Well, you know what? They do exist, but you got to talk to them. You got to go find that boogeyman, okay? Because it's not me.
And people like him come in. I'm going to critique this guy.
Debate-based Empanada. Hey, he came into my DMs to debate and being like, hey, do you want to debate China? And if America or China's better? And I was like, sure, here's my nuanced opinion. He was like, never mind, fuck you. And it was like, okay, goodbye. And that was it.
And I'm also going to use it as a bit of a springboard to talk about how the very notion of foreign policy is totally fucking ludicrous. But first, let me make a bit of an analogy here.
Imagine making a statement like that. The notion of foreign policy is ridiculous. Okay, buddy. The notion of economics, the notion of math, the notion of architecture, very ridiculous. The notion of economic policy, right? And then here comes the grandstanding. It's not economic policy, it's how to steal from the poor policy. Like, okay, got you. Here comes the grandstanding.
Imagine that you have some guy, like 21-year-old dude from China, who starts posting on Twitter or whatever. He makes like a Twitch stream and he's like, hey guys, here's why all the stuff that China would be doing anyway is actually good, and why China should continue doing it and why you should support it. And it's like, that's a bit sketch. Let's look into this guy. And it's like, oh, he's worked for as an advisor to Chinese politicians before. He's interned for pro-government Chinese NGOs. He's like
pro-government. Wait, okay. I worked for a pro-government, and I've never worked for a pro-government American NGO. Which NGO are we talking about? Talking about a political PAC? Is that what's being referenced? or what's okay. I don't really know, but okay. Number one, if that happened, of course that would be sketch. But the sketch part would be primarily for me that they said everything China's doing is great. Wonderful. If, let's say, it was a Chinese streamer who was like, actually, I think China trading with all these countries in the Belt and Road Initiative is beneficial for both Chinese people and the people we're trading with. I think they should have more options besides like the IMF and the WHO and all these other international organizations that are not going to give them a fair shake, or maybe the evil United States. I'd be like, okay, whatever. And if they also went on to criticize the government of China when it came to say their policy with Taiwan or the Philippines or any of these other countries,
occurred is occurred.
Wonderful, because that's what I do. That's what I do constantly. I've talked about this on many occasions. He hasn't watched my streams. He hasn't really interacted with my content. He just stumbled upon my tweet and stumbled upon my tweets on other occasions and then came to all these conclusions about me in his head that he is now projecting onto me without giving me a fair shake.
Occurred is occurred.
Look, if you wanted to say I'm a lefty who believes too much in doing like that America can do good actually, or this person, this Dylan Burns is an idealistic kid or whatever, fine, take that route, okay? A million others have done that before, right? Oh, Dylan is just some young kid, or I'm used to those attacks. But what you're doing right now is attacking a person who does not exist in this conversation.
It's like very clearly trying to like get a job in like the Beijing foreign ministry or something. And it's like, maybe this guy is a bit of a fucking government shill. And then you look at Dylan Burns and it's like, that's literally him.
Cheers.
That's literally Dylan
100.
Burns. Like,
just got here who's molding today.
It's sad Empanada. Dude, why is he so stuck up on this? I don't understand why he made this video. If he just made this video to say I disagree with Dylan's opinion on Taiwan, that'd be another thing. But instead, we're 4 minutes in, and all he's done is strawman my political career, say things about it which is incorrect, and then say that I have opinions that I don't. But the whole reason he's doing this is he wants to discredit me, right? He wants to discredit me in the eyes of his audience. Because let's say that I was what he says I was. Let's say that I'm just somebody who starts stream and says America the best, China evil, Russia evil, all of them evil, evil, evil. America the best. And we need to protect the Middle East because, I don't know, feminism. And all we need to do in the Middle East, we need to be in all these countries and we need to invade Iran for feminism. And then I started having this like Henry Kissinger type policy prescription. Well, yeah, having this type of a reaction to somebody like that would be justified. But that's not who I am. And so by him discrediting me in this way, he does not need to put in as much effort when actually engaging with my ideas. In fact, he doesn't need to engage with my ideas basically at all. Because if people in his audience have already thought Dylan is that piece of shit, imperialist swine who is doing nothing but trying to lobby for his big, cushy DC job, then yeah, I would discredit them. Anybody who believed that would discredit that human being.
like that analogy is Dylan Burns. But because he's doing it for the US government, it's okay, right? Because he's not doing it for the evil yellow peril Chinese government, it's no longer state propaganda. He's actually a nuanced, really well-read, incredibly smart political analyst, despite the fact that he's like some 21-year-old fucking...
Yeah. Hey guys, welcome to the Dylan Burns stream. We've moved on from third wave feminism. Now we're on to drone wave feminism. Okay, let's get into it. Like, I don't know what stream he's talking about.
Kid in like his first year of an international
Hey, third year. Not first.
Relations degree. And by the way, you can really tell where that comes in because there's this thing where students of these sort of relatively abstract disciplines notably international relations, political science, and sometimes economics. So I don't think economics as a whole is that abstract. I think like a lot of the stuff that you learn in your first few years is very abstract and you don't really come out learning much. But international relations and political science are these incredibly abstract disciplines that don't really tell you anything useful about the world, right? Most useful political theory.
Dylan is a statist who wants to control others. This is true. Yes. I do. Yes. That isn't something I debate. I believe in like traffic laws and, you know, banning smoking in like public places, like parks with children. Yes, I am a statist in that way. Yes.
Theory doesn't come from international.
Yes, I believe in enforcing age of consent laws as well, by the way.
Relations or political science, despite the fact that you would think they produce a lot. It comes from social science and like philosophy, history. These disciplines do way more for actually useful, actionable political theory than the actual like entirely theoretical based disciplines of political science and international relations. And this kid is like just took like the introductory international relation class and he's always trying to make references to like the basics of international relations theory as if he's some sort of incredible brain genius because he just repeating uncritically the sort of stuff that they told him in class.
I repeat uncritically the type of stuff they told him in class. Okay, number one, if someone explains to me a concept in class, I'm not going to automatically agree with it. For example, I'm not a realist. When they explained realism, I wasn't just like, well, I'm a realist now. Oh, and I just went around with a realist. The UN means nothing. International organizations mean nothing. I looked at this and said, this doesn't account for the modern economy. This does not account for this. This does not account for that. I think putting myself in a realist box does not make sense. And also, what's wrong with me bringing up basic concepts when it comes to international relations? Let me ask a chat question. For example, chat, do you guys know what strategic hedging is? Put a 1 in chat if you know what it is. Put a 2 in chat if you don't. Just a quick test. Okay, so there's a few 1s, but that's mostly 2s. Okay, now that we'll have to address during another stream. But that shows that there's a lot of concepts about how nations plan and interact with each other, right? And how governments like strategize. For example, if you look at Qatar in the Middle East, they are practicing strategic hedging. If you look at the Philippines right now, I was talking to somebody about this recently. I believe they are more and more practicing between the United States and China what you could consider strategic hedging, right? And having these words to describe real world phenomenons. Hell, Belarus is a classic example of a nation that is practicing strategic hedging, right? Having words to describe these concepts of how nations in between two large powers, whether it be coalitions or nations, interact and how they get the best out of them. And Yugoslavia is another example, by the way. This is useful. Trying to understand how nations interact with each other is useful. And let's say that you disregarded all IR, right? Like strategic hedging, more like strategic bullshit, right? Okay. But realism, more like fucking deadbeat dadism, right? Or whatever the hell. Classic JLP line. Fine, whatever. But that doesn't, just because you disregard it, doesn't mean other people disregard. As in, let's say all of America, this was like, we're done with IR theory. Other nations still use IR theory, like China, like Russia, the UK, France, Mozambique, I don't know, Mongolia, Myanmar. All these nations also have scholars who study IR theory and then use IR theory when advising politicians, the thing that you're very scared of. So even if we just completely discredited this completely hypothetical world, which, by the way, has clear real-world examples. Let's say we just completely threw that out the window. It would still be useful just to understand how other nations view the world and view conflicts. So I don't think that discrediting IR theory on its whole and saying this is dumb or whatever, discredit it, or going after me for explaining these concepts to chat, when, like I've just shown, there's many of them which are basic concepts that chat doesn't necessarily understand, that they could benefit from understanding when we're talking about international conflict. I don't think that's a bad thing. Even if it's 100% hypothetical. Okay, and what's wrong with learning about that? Whatever.
And it's very cringe. It's definitely unbased.
Voluntarist girl, I've talked to you before. What are you doing? Why do you jump in here every time just to say this is why laws are bad, right? Why?
It works because the average American has no fucking clue what's going on. So they see this guy and he's like justifying the things that they already believed in a way that fits.
You're cringe and unbased, BadEmpanada. You know, I had yet to consider that. I take back everything I've ever said about Taiwan. Valid point.
Their pre-existing like sort of socially progressive biases. And they're like, wow, this guy fucking rules. Hence the success and hence the fact that he's going to end up in a couple of years at the very most probably being like a formal advisor to like
in a couple of years.
Democrat imperialists telling them how to sell like the latest war. But
could you imagine in 2 years I'm already an advisor to like a senator? My God, BadEmpanada has much higher hopes for me in the immediate future than I do. My goal in the next 2 years is to like run for city council. I mean, okay.
I was saying, like, imagine a Chinese guy doing the same exact shit. Those same people would hate that person. They'd like be making like 20 post long Twitter threads about how he's a government propagandist and a shill, and how actually China is a terrible, evil imperialist state, far worse than the US could ever hope to be. But because Dylan Burns is an American doing that...
You know, I should pull a Jackson Hinkle and say, I don't engage with hypotheticals. Hypotheticals are terrible. But again, if it was just some Chinese person who was like, China can never do any wrong, it does everything correct, support everything China do, then of course, then I would be like, yes, this person just seems to do nothing more but just shield for the government. But I've displayed on multiple times on my stream before, and I've displayed by just, quite frankly, just stating what I believe, that isn't what I do on my stream, that isn't what I do on my YouTube channel, that isn't what I do on my Twitter. You're coming to that conclusion based off of one Twitter thread. That's it. Why is he so unbelievably bad faith? He seems like such a nice guy in his like video essays, but he really gets off the rails anytime it's not scripted.
Their brains turn off and they can't critique it. Probably one of the best things I've seen is just an example of how stupid Dylan Burns and people like him actually is this tweet. This other streamer, if you don't know who he is, I don't know how, but this other streamer, Hassan Piker, like had a take saying that the US shouldn't provide like $2 billion to Taiwan so that it can buy weapons. Okay.
Now is literally because we...
Wait, what? Wait. Okay. Let me just make sure he said what I think he said.
Piker like had a take saying that the US shouldn't provide like $2 billion to Taiwan so that it can buy weapons. Okay.
Now is literally because we have been escalating tensions against China by beefing up Taiwan, giving Taiwan, what is it, like $1.8 billion worth of arms? Like what is this?
Attention, Westerners.
I'm gonna keep it at 100.
Okay. Okay, so Sad Empanada here just did something really strange. So he says that Hassan is angry about the United States giving like $2 billion to Taiwan so they can buy arms. That's not what we're doing. We're approving a potential of almost $2 billion in arms sales to Taiwan. There is a difference between us giving them $2 billion, right? Like, here's money for guns, and then they go buy them, and then buying them from the United States. And he says that right before watching a video where the article comes on screen that directly, right here, if you can read it, it's kind of hard to read from here, directly just disproves what he said. Dude, you had time to edit this video, man. You make video essays. It wouldn't have been that difficult. You just edit that out.
Okay, I'm gonna keep it real. Why don't we do this for Hawaii? Like, what would happen if China was just like, you know what? We're just gonna give Hawaii $1.8 billion worth of fucking drones so that the indigenous population there can fucking defend itself. Okay? Which would be a little bit more justifiable than what the fuck we're...
Also, I've talked at length in any of my other videos why the comparison doesn't make sense, but also why I would not have a problem if the United States was getting ready to, like, say, invade Cuba, or threatening to invade Cuba, if China stepped in and said, hey, Cuba, here's some guns to defend yourself. Noided Android, thanks for the tier 1.
we're doing here with respect...
No, that sounds
What's good, Dylan? Started watching a debate with Jackson Hinkle earlier. What a man-child. I would never call him a man-child. He is a brave warrior in the fight against Dylan Burns.
completely correct there, by the way. Puerto Rico.
He has no problems with that. No problems with the comparison between Puerto Rico and Taiwan at all. No difference when it comes to the history of the civil. Okay, got it. Dope.
Rico probably would have been a better analogy, but he's completely correct.
Okay.
And Dylan Burns is...
Can we talk about that, by the way? Like, that's what I would have actually appreciated. A video was like, here is why we shouldn't support Taiwan. Like, can we get that? Can we get that instead of this?
response to that. Response to Hassan saying that, you know, the US shouldn't pump Taiwan full of weapons is to say, yo, like, you know, he's obviously trying to suck up to him because he wants to leech off Hassan's clout.
I'm trying to suck up to Hassan. Dude, look. I mean, I cannot explain intention. If nobody's gonna believe intention if I just say intention, but I have said multiple times that I wanted to be as good faith as physically possible when it came to this, right? Because I think when you're good faith and you're nice, that you get more flies with honey than vinegar. But I'm trying to leech off of Hassan's clout. I mean, that's intention or whatever. I could easily say that this video is just BadEmpanada trying to leech off of my success, which he has lauded as success in this video. I mean, dude, I can't just read into someone's intentions.
Because Hassan is a massive streamer. He gets like 40,000 views sometimes, 40,000 viewers sometimes, like concurrent viewers. And he's like, do you really believe that United States should not provide Taiwan with the means to defend itself? Literally like propagandistic language, right? The means to defend itself.
So, yes, yes, the means to defend itself. What do you think they would use the weapons for? Do you think they're gonna plan an invasion of the mainland? Do you think the Taiwanese are under any delusion whatsoever that they're gonna launch an invasion? Any weapons that would actually see active combat when it comes to Taiwan would be in defense of Taiwan.
It's exactly what you would expect from like a government proclamation. And this is like a nuanced like foreign policy analyst or whatever. And then his justification for it is the Taiwan Relations Act.
That wasn't my justification for it. I asked a question to Hassan. Do you really believe that the United States should not provide Taiwan with the means to defend itself? And then, if you go over here, I talk about the Taiwan Relations Act at length, right? I go into detail about it, da-da-da-da-da. And then after that, I say, you said that us continuing this policy with the recent deal made between the U.S. and Taiwan is an escalation. My question is how? If it has been our policy since the late 1970s, even through the highest point of Chinese and American relations during the deepest part of the Sino-Soviet split, then how is it just now an escalation? This just seems like a continuation of the status quo that has kept Taiwan safe. Now you may say, and I get into more detail, right? So this was two parts. First, I asked him a question, because he doesn't say here that America shouldn't necessarily like support Taiwan or provide Taiwan with the needs of defense itself. He just saw the 1.8 and was like, that's bad. So I wanted a clarification on what he believed. And the rest of this was me talking about how his classification of this as an escalation, I think is inaccurate, because just like dictionary definition is not an escalation. If you continue something that's been policy for decades upon decades upon decades upon decades, if you continue that policy, that's not an escalation. That's a continuation of the status quo. And I think when we're talking about what could potentially become what everybody is calling the quote-unquote new Cold War, I think words like escalation have meaning, and we need to be careful with them. So this is not a justification of mine. I think the slightest you could get there to a actual justification in here for this first thing was, I think, around here. No, never mind. I'm wrong. Sorry. That's actually a different point. So, no, this was actually two parts. First, I asked Hassan a question, and Second, I say this is why I don't agree with your use of the word escalation. So this is not a justification of this. It wouldn't make sense to be a justification of this because this would be a legalistic argument, which laws don't dictate morality. I believe that if someone smokes pot, they shouldn't go to prison, even if it's illegal. That doesn't matter to me. So I know that a legalistic defense here wouldn't make sense. The closest you could say that this could be used as a defense is saying that, well, if we backstab Taiwan by stopping our support, that does hurt American reputation overseas, even though the United States government is pretty good at doing it on its own anyway. But no, it's two separate parts. And if you read the whole thing, you get right here, it's like, you can see it's me giving him information and then me asking him a question about what he said in relation to that information that might be new information that I'm providing him. It's not a legalistic defense of the position. And that's how everybody interacted with it. They just dismissed it because you're saying, oh, because it's law, then it's okay. No, the majority of this had to do with me arguing against the idea that it is an escalation, which just dictionary definition, it is not an escalation. Where was it? Oh, here we go.
Which has been law since 1979, clearly states that the United States should provide Taiwan with arms of a defensive character. Oh, so if U.S. law says that the U.S. should give weapons to Taiwan, the U.S. should give weapons to Taiwan.
That was not my argument. My argument is that if this has been our policy since the 70s, then you can't call it an escalation. You would call it a continuation of the status quo. Our deal with Australia and the UK to provide Australia with nuclear submarines, that's an escalation. Because that's a break from the status quo of Australia, you know, not having nuclear submarines.
Holy shit.
Again, he wants to argue with somebody that isn't here. He wants to argue with somebody he's made up in his mind, man.
Amazing argument.
How can he make so many video essays and also not know how to read? This is the second time he has failed to read in just this first 10 minutes of this interaction.
Wow. I've got another great argument for you, foreign policy expert Dylan Burns. The Nazi declaration of war on Poland says that the Nazis should go to war against Poland. Ergo, Nazi Germany's war against Poland is legitimate and good. Does that sound good to you? It's literally the exact same fucking argument.
Okay, so I think I understand why he makes video essays and does not debate people really or do many live streams. I think he should go back to the essays because, dude, like, just reread the thread. How many times did he read the thread before doing this? I know he tweeted about it too. Like, this has nothing to do with it.
We passed the law saying that the thing that we want to do is good and that we should do it. Ergo, this thing is good and we should do it. It's just the level of analysis of a 20-year-old first-year international relations student.
Sad Empanada, let me just say. Now, I think you're constantly bringing up my age now. I mean, you mentioned it once, that was enough, but you bring it up constantly. Now, I assume this is due to, instead of like you trying to, I guess, well, I think in part it's to prime your audience against me, but I think also now it's starting to feel more like an insecurity, like you just want to be able to dismiss what I'm saying. But if that's the case, if what you're saying is I'm just a silly 20-year-old dumbass who pretends to know what he's talking about, then you're the person much older than me. I mean, you got like a full goddamn beard, right? Much older than me. What are you, like 37? I have no clue, right? Like 1 foot in the grave, who knows, right? You're the person much older than me who has less reading comprehension skills than me. And I sucked at English class, okay? I sucked. I still have terrible handwriting.
Oh my god. This is like the level of the average American liberal. This is what this is.
It's just, dude, he's just like, the Americans, this is how they operate. Okay, man, dude, this is like sliding outside of like, well, I just disagree with the policy. This is like sliding the weird, like these damn Americans. Like, okay, man, dude, I look, I bet this guy really enjoyed the first half of Rocky 4. Okay, but he turned it off after that. He didn't want to see the ending. Okay, he just needed his adrenaline rush.
This is what passes for like high-level analysis for them.
The thing is, it doesn't even need to be a high-level analysis. Number one, you're misinterpreting a pretty basic thread. You didn't even understand the story I was talking about in question when it came to the $1.8 billion in arms sales, right? Saying we're giving them money to then buy, like that's not what's going on, right? But on top of everything else, you're just... Can I also just bring up the fact that he like has made fun of my looks a lot, and I think he does so later in the video. You know what? I'll save that till later. I'll let him finish. But back to my main point. He is trying to make the argument here that like this is what passes for high level analysis. I unironically don't need to like dig down into deep essays to talk about foreign policy on Twitch, because the conversations that are happening on Twitch is not, well, you know, when it comes to Qatar practicing strategic hedging, I think the Gulf states need to accept the fact that their pressuring of Qatar failed miserably, and they're not going to be able to control Al Jazeera. And when we look at Qatar going forward, when it comes to their relationship with her, that's not the conversations that's happening on Twitch, okay? These, sadly, are the conversations happening on Twitch, right? Maybe one day we'll dig deep into it. But yeah, surface level analysis is I think, the first thing you need to do before you can get any deeper.
The bill also states the President of Congress shall determine the nature and quantity of such defense articles and services based solely upon their judgment of the needs of Taiwan. Who fucking cares? So the consideration of Beijing's reaction to the continuation of this long-standing policy is not taken into account. And then he's like, this is because it could undermine our commitment to Taiwan's security. And this is a vital building block of not only Taiwanese national security, but also our relationship to the island nation. He sounds like a fucking US government press release. He literally sounds...
It's probably because multiple times I cited US government documents, okay? I don't care how I sound.
Like a US government press release. He sounds like a straight up, it could be a Republican or a Democrat government. It could be George W. Bush. He talks like a fucking...
If I'm citing US government law, then yes, it's gonna sound very official sounding. And who cares? I was very careful with my words in a thread. It doesn't matter.
US government press release. The island nation. You can't make this shit up.
The island nation. Ooh. Big boy words.
He's clearly trying to sell himself to, like, you know, people who want to hire someone like him to sell US imperialism in Washington, D.C. That's why he talks like this. That's why he says the stuff that he does. You know, he wants a Kashi like 6 figures.
Yeah, you know what? When I say Coomers, and I bring up the Coomers in chat, and I say Yi versus Pepe, and I bring that conversation up, right? When I post eyes emoji under men I find attractive on Twitter, that is me priming for my future in U.S. foreign policy.
A salary job, like telling people in Washington, so, you know, you could justify this invasion of Iran by saying that women there wouldn't have to wear a hijab afterwards. That sounds pretty good to me. What do you think?
He's just talking to someone that doesn't exist.
What do you think, Kamala?
Who is this?
It's pretty good, Dylan. Great job.
Wow.
Here's your $500,000 under the table bribe. And it's Kamala because Biden will be dead by then. Like, yeah, the guy...
Wait. No, not if I get him the adrenochrome, he'll be fine.
The guy is clearly trying to sell himself as neutral to people who lack the critical thinking capacity to question what he's saying. And all that he's doing is selling you, like, the most obvious US imperialist talking points imaginable. It's not obvious to Americans and people who are inclined to like America because, you know, they've been brainwashed into US exceptionalism their entire life.
By the way, can I just talk about how cynical we all are online? Where if you, in a tweet where you criticize somebody or to have a disagreement, just try to somewhat act nice, immediately it's grift. Like, I needed to open up the Hassan tweet like, hey, you bastard. Remember the 9/11 video? You remember that? Huh? You remember what you said about a brave congressman? Anyway, I heard you wanted to backstab the people of Taiwan. Westerner backstabbing some Asian people. Like, no, I wanted to interact for once, maybe, like a decent human being with somebody. Whatever.
They believe that the US needs to like be the world police and fix the entire world, which makes it very easy to manipulate them into believing that US imperialism is actually a good thing. And yeah, the fact that Dylan Burns sells himself as a leftist is absolutely fucking ludicrous.
Do I call myself a leftist? Do I do that? I think I've had this conversation a few times. I don't call myself a leftist. I don't really care generally about labels or whatever the hell, right? I guess the closest you can say is maybe sock dem. Like, some people just call me a lib. Some people call me a dem sock. I don't really care. Much for the labels. But no, I don't try to sell myself as a leftist, right? Other people try to include me in breadtube. I talk to a lot of breadtubers. I talk to a lot of leftists. But I don't really care much about the labeling of a leftist. I sell myself as a leftist. Okay. I say I'm on the left, whatever that might mean. But I guess his like left is like, I don't know, if you're like actively like throwing Molotov cocktails at police stations, then you're left wing. Everything else, right wing. Okay.
There's not a single leftist belief that he has. And this is another thing that I wanted to link into this, is that the notion of US foreign policy...
By the way, I could just lie right here and just be like, oh, really? I want to nationalize all industries. Boom. He doesn't know. He hasn't done any research into me. I could say that right now, and he would just have to believe me, because he's done zero research.
See, like, the way that people in the US talk about foreign policy is truly ridiculous. It's not the same way that people think about foreign policy in other countries. In other countries, foreign policy is like diplomacy, right? It's like just our general interactions with other countries as equals or whatever, right? In the US, foreign policy is not that. It's a question of how should we...
Dude, I wish I still had all the DMs with BadEmpanada, all the old ones. But the thing is, he gets banned off of Twitter for either like threatening somebody or saying whatever the hell on Twitter like all the time. So the whatever account he DM'd me on, like those DMs are long gone. Wait, do you still have the DMs from accounts that are deleted? Do those still exist? Do you still have access to those? Or are they like, nah, they're gone? They're gone? Oh, okay.
Interfere in these other countries? How should we act upon these other countries? What should we do to these other countries? And that's the position that people like Dylan Burns and 99.9% of Americans come from. It's like, we need to act upon these other countries. We need to do things to them. We have to do things to them. We can't just leave them to their own devices. We must mold them how we think we should. And of course, Dylan Burns, like, probably...
And you know what? I could respond to it. I could have a back and forth about that. But my one example would just be like, what example are you going to give me? Let's get into specifics. Which country, right? Because he's done no research into me. So legitimately, like what? Are we talking about Taiwan? Because if that's the example you're using, right? They have asked for our support. So I don't know if that's doing upon them, right? Now, maybe you could say, well, Dylan, didn't you support the Magnitsky sanctions on the leaders in Myanmar? And I'm like, yes, because I do not believe those actively participating in a genocide and mowing down protesters should be given U.S. governmental assistance. And I don't believe those people should be supported by United States financial institutions. Not to mention, those sanctions are extremely milquetoast in the first place, though, anyway. Right? Like should it instead be like, yes, please, take our money, take our everything, use our money to mow down those protesters? Like, is that doing something upon a country? I mean, yeah, but I think it's justified.
I don't know.
Oh, but Dylan, the rioting has to stop, you know? You know? I have never thought about it from that perspective. Big brain.
He might legitimately think that, like, his prescriptions of what the US should do to other countries are going to help the people there or whatever.
What is that statement? Listen to this.
Probably, I don't know. He might legitimately think that, like, his prescriptions of what the US should do to other countries are going to help the people there or whatever. But
what's with this just assumption of like evil doing, right? He might legitimately believe that his politics helps people. Yeah, that's usually why people advocate for political positions. I guess, like, in his mind, he just sees me as the next Henry Kissinger. That I've gotten into this position to do what I'm doing. Not because I want to be genuinely involved in politics and want to help people, but because I am this evil manipulator in the background pulling the strings, and one day I'll advise politicians to like go into every village in every poor country in the world and just kick baby seals or whatever, right? He has no clue. He's just assuming. He's just assuming like the worst possible intent. This is what being bad faith looks like, is where he is showing very evidently right here that he's assuming just the worst possible things you could possibly assume about me. And just assuming every single one is true and is unquestionable. But maybe Dylan might actually believe what he's saying. I usually believe that what people tell me is what they believe until they give me a reason not to believe them, right? Like, for example, like if BadEmpanada came up to me and said, hello, my name is Miguel, and then next week he says my name is Steven, I'll be like, well, now I have a reason to question his name. Neither of those are his real name. I have no clue what his name is. Unless I got really lucky and I'm about to get in a ton of trouble.
The fact is that US imperialism has been sold in that way for more than a century. It's always been sold like that. It's always been, you know, we're bringing democracy to these people. We're doing things to help them.
He does come off, you're right, he does come off immensely self-righteous here, yes.
Whether the people who are implementing these policies actually believe that or not, that's the way that it's sold. Dylan Burns is just another guy who's useful for selling that exact same sort of thing. Like, if you're an American, I think one of the best things that you can do is to change the way.
Why is it that like everybody that is doing this, there's so like, if he wanted to legitimately criticize me, right, it would make my job so much harder if he did not act so self-righteous and also like such an asshole. If he was like, Dylan is supporting imperialism in this way, and Dylan, I think is, you know, is somebody who has not grounded his beliefs for this reason, and he's really doing surface level analysis, and this is why his tweet's wrong. If he did it that way, I'd have to sit here and I'd have to like, okay, let me engage with those points. I actually have to like put some effort in here. But so far, it's him not doing proper research about my career, him just assuming my intent in the most bad faith way possible, insulting me, misreading my tweets, misreading what the whole thing was about when it comes to the actual deal with Taiwan. And so all I have to do is just sit here and say, no, that was wrong factually. And I just keep moving.
Way that you think about, quote,
is there anybody who will have a decent, good faith conversation with me on Taiwan? I have something scheduled for this Thursday. Hopefully, the conversation this Thursday is going to be okay. Proletopia, thank you so much for the raid of 189 people. I appreciate the support. I really do, buddy.
Unquote foreign policy.
Who is Proletopia? Well, you know what? Well, actually, I might have to learn more about this person. I'll put their link in chat. Where were we?
Not to think about it in these terms anymore, not to think about it in how can the US act upon other nations. For all these people's like performative denouncements of the US enemies like Russia and China, they think a lot like a Duginist. The principal geopolitical thought in Russia is basically that, right? You know, how can Russia act upon these other nations and get what we want out of them? That's exactly how Americans think. It's exactly how Dylan Burns thinks.
Again, substantiated by literally nothing. Now, if he wants to ask my honest thing, like, as somebody who is an American, and I think this is how most people in every country operate, that I would like things that are beneficial for America, right? Like, I want trade deals that makes Americans wealthier and more prosperous, right? But this is what most people in every country on the planet believe. Now, I want to make sure that those things are not to the detriment of other peoples around the world. I want it to be as mutually beneficial as possible. Again, like he's making all these like claims about me and substantiating none of them, right? He has this general caricature of like a foreign policy evil man, right? Like if I was to think about how he views me, this is what he did. It's like somebody just put this in front of him and said, this is the person you are debating or going after. He is evil, and his primary concern is smuggling weapons to those who kill baby seals. That's what this feels like, that he just thought of the worst possible caricature of who I am or who people in the general sphere that I want to maybe work in one day is like, and said, that's him, get him. And can I just say, by the way, I don't even know if I want to be a foreign policy advisor. I quite frankly like doing like this interaction with people who don't know much about foreign policy and talking to them about it. I also want to run for office, and I have an announcement about that possibly coming out soon, because I did recently run for something, and I want to talk about that. And why actually there needs to be some swearing in stuff before I can actually talk about it publicly. That's going to be talked about next month. And in 2 years, if everything goes well, I'll run for city council, right? That's what I'm thinking about my immediate future. Maybe I'll do this, but all this is built upon something that might not even necessarily happen.
Is occurred.
But if it does, that's not necessarily even a bad thing.
It's exactly how everyone in the U.S. government, everyone...
School trustees? No, it actually has to do with a citizens association for my part of the city.
with this sort of mentality thinks. They're not as different from the evil enemies as they think they are. So yeah, basically the thesis here is, most importantly, because really Dylan Burns is not an important person at all. One, change the way that you think about foreign policy. You can't just...
Oh, and just so BadEmpanada doesn't say Dylan upplayed what that is. It is literally probably the lowest level you can even think of an elected position, quote unquote. I wouldn't even call it elected office, but it is probably like, it is really important for when it comes to like having influence on what type of projects get built in College Park, when it comes to what the citizens of my part of College Park think about it, and what they tell the city council and the county council and the state government, what the people of my part of the city believe about those things. So I'll get more into it next month. We shouldn't really talk about this right now.
How the US acts upon other countries. How about you let other countries do their fucking thing instead of trying to be the police of the world? And really, that's not even what the US does, okay? What the US does is try to defend its interests around the world, try to make money for the corporations who are the ones who are donating and winning campaigns for political candidates there. And two, far less important, is that Dylan Burns is just the government shill. He's a US government shill. Doesn't matter what...
He's like a broken record. He's got nothing else. He's just Dylan just loves America and everything it does. Don't you see? He's got an American flag in his background. He's got. Do you see those new cardboard cutouts he has? It's like, okay, buddy, please. Like anything else.
Government is there in terms of his specialty, which he somehow convinced a bunch of even stupider people that he holds. Foreign policy. He is completely in line with the Republicans and the Democrats. Doesn't matter which party. They're both the same one.
Oh, what?
Foreign policy.
They're the same on foreign policy. I mean, I guess the JCPOA, there's no difference on the JCPOA. There's no difference when it comes to pulling out of Afghanistan and who was going to be elected. I'm sure Pete Buttigieg would have had the same policy on Afghanistan as Joe Biden. I'm sure that when we look at the Republicans like Jeb Bush, he was going to have the same policy when it comes to Afghanistan as Joe Biden or Donald Trump. I'm sure that there's no differences when it comes to any number of issues. No differences whatsoever.
Like a Republican.
What about Cuba? I'm not even going to get it.
Administration hiring Dylan Burns to be like, oh, imagine that.
Because this is how this conversation goes every time. Well, I think there's notable differences. Oh, really? Point to them. And I'll be like, well, look at this. Like, you can see notable decreases in drone strikes and changes in policies with Iran and Cuba. And they'll say, oh, so those tiny differences. It's like, oh, so there all are differences. You just want to downplay them. Okay, got it. This conversation, I have it every few months.
Lego blockhead, right? The reason that we need to reinvade Iraq is because
wait, what was that?
Like a Republican administration hiring Dylan Burns to be like, oh, imagine that I've got his Lego blockhead, right? The reason that we need to
hey, look, it's an iron chin to combat an iron curtain.
Invade Iraq is because recently a lot of women in Iraq have been forced to wear hijabs. So we need to start bombing them and killing hundreds of thousands of them immediately. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Well, damn. When you put it that way, BadEmpanada. No, I never thought about that policy before. We better start up the Apaches soon.
I honestly can't.
By the way, I mean, maybe it would make sense if I ever supported the war in Iraq.
cannot believe that take on Twitter, like literally just like justifying massive US military aid to Taiwan purely because it's the law.
That's not what that was. You didn't read.
I just wanted to note, like, he notes that this law began in 1979. Like, the fact that this law dates back to 1979 proves precisely why the US actually supports Taiwan.
The U.S. supports Taiwan for multiple reasons that are ever evolving. One, of course, is clearly anti-communism. Another would be the fact that it is extremely domestically unpopular to withdraw support for Taiwan. Another reason would be that they were our allies against the Japanese in World War II, the ROC. And many people would see it as backstabbing an ally. And ever since it has evolved into a democracy, it's more democratic tendencies that the people of Taiwan fought for, by the way. Because some people will bring that up to me. Like, what about the White Terror? Which, for those who don't know, was one of the largest periods of martial law in world history, was the White Terror in Taiwan. It lasted until 1987, and shortly after was the first democratic elections. Over 100,000 people were disappeared, quote unquote. And the thing is, it's terrible, god awful. I hate authoritarianism, right? I hate it. It's disgusting. And you know what? So did the people who fought against the White Terror. So were the people who protested against Chiang Kai-shek and his offspring, right? So were the people who fought against the dictatorship. And you want to know some of the people that they purged were? They ended up being what would today be considered, and what they were considered at the time, Taiwanese independence advocates. I think it was like the Formosan League was one of the examples or whatever, right? And this is like basic knowledge. And after the Taiwanese people succeed in getting rid of that dictatorship, what is instituted? A democracy, which they participate in. So, yes, I am in support of supporting the Taiwanese people's wishes in getting rid of that dictatorship and having a democracy. Because let's think about what the Chinese government is offering them. One country, two systems, and that's best case scenario if they come along peacefully, quote unquote. We saw what happened with the laws in Hong Kong. The security laws. I mean, come on, some of the shit is petty. It's like petty authoritarianism, like the law that like bans people from booing at protests, booing the Chinese national anthem with like a few years in prison. I mean, that shit's ridiculous. That's like petty, like Donald Trump levels of like, oh, if you burn the American flag, you should go to prison for 5 years. And I just want to note that after what went down in Hong Kong went down, the support for any type of reconciliation in that way plummeted even more in Taiwan. So I am wanting to support what the people of Taiwan fought to build when they got rid of the dictatorship. That's what I'm willing to do.
It's not because of democracy. It's not because of freedom. It's not because Taiwan is a great democratic nation. It's to have a geopolitical ally against the big, bad, evil, yellow peril, China. Because in 1979, Taiwan was a fascist dictatorship.
In his entire career, Dylan hasn't once expressed his opinion about motor scooters. Dude, I don't know much about motor scooters, but I had one of those electric scooters from campus that you can like use your phone and like scan. And dude, those things are so much fun. I'm thinking of buying my own. Those things are fun, man. It's so much fun.
That was actively doing state terrorism against the population every single day. Taiwan was under fucking martial law. Like the idea,
yes,
other than because
the thing is, this is weird because this supports my point. Because if we use this as an example, then you could be like, yes, I acknowledge that the United States, or at least most certainly a lot of the actors within the United States that helped guide American policy towards Taiwan, were not doing it out of some principled stance for democracy. There was a dictatorship under Chiang Kai-shek. But the only path forward to protect the democracy that the people of Taiwan fought for against the fascist dictatorship, which you seem to hate so much, is the liberal democracy that they put in place afterwards and fought for. And many of those purged by the White Terror were Taiwanese independence organizations.
Supports Taiwan because of democracy and freedom, rather than because they need a convenient place to send weapons and to threaten China from that's right next to its mainland is absurd. That's why this epic act, that this law that Dylan Burns uses to justify US imperialism, is in place specifically because the US doesn't fucking care that Taiwan was a dictatorship. By the way, it was far worse of...
The US does not care. Wow. This is some deep... hey, you know what? BadEmpanada, these are some deep, high-level analysis you're doing. Never thought about it that way before. Thank you for opening my eyes.
A totalitarian dictatorship than China is today. They don't care that it was doing state terrorism against its population, imprisoning journalists, whatever. And that really just shows you what Dylan Burns is really about. Dylan Burns does not defend the US's relationship with Taiwan because he believes that Taiwan is an epic democracy that deserves sovereignty or whatever. He does it...
He has no evidence to prove that that's not the reason why I support it.
Because he's a supporter of US imperialism.
Again, you have yet to substantiate any of that. The thing is, this is supposed to be the end where he's like, and let's put a bow on it. But he hasn't even started wrapping the present. You can't put a bow on it when you haven't done any of the legwork.
That deserves sovereignty or whatever. He does it because he's a supporter of US imperialism. It's very simple.
Have you ever considered hiring BadEmpanada as your campaign manager for the election? I felt that this is what Dylan is really about in my heart, truly. Oh yeah, and then after I debated Jackson Hinkle, he made this video. I'm not even gonna... I've done enough BadEmpanada for one day. But dude, the follow-ups, man. The follow-ups. Dude, Dude, this is not smoking copium. This is snorting cocaine, man. God.